Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. Today, we're diving into an emotional and unforgettable journey. The very first time Tu Diep and little Ly step onto an airplane as James takes them back to his hometown to celebrate Tet with his family. Will fear hold them back, or will this flight change everything? Stay with me to find out. And if you enjoy heartfelt family stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming videos. The late afternoon wind moved softly through the bamboo forest, brushing against the wooden walls of the small house where James, Tu Diep, and little Ly were busy cleaning and preparing for Tet. The scent of fresh leaves mixed with the faint sweetness of sticky rice drifting from the kitchen. It was one of those quiet, peaceful moments that felt almost too fragile to disturb. Until James suddenly put down the broom, looked at his wife and daughter, and said with a calm but excited smile, "This year, we're going back to my hometown to celebrate Tet. I want you and Ly to meet my family properly." Tu Diep froze mid-motion, a folded red ao dai slipping slightly from her hands. "Your hometown?" she repeated, her voice soft but laced with surprise. "You mean we're traveling there?" James nodded. "Yes, we're flying." The word hung in the air like something enormous. Flying. Tu Diep had never been on a plane before. In fact, she had barely traveled beyond neighboring towns. Her fingers tightened around the fabric. "I've never been on an airplane," she admitted quietly. Little Ly, who had been crouched on the floor arranging lucky red envelopes into a crooked line, suddenly looked up with sparkling eyes. "Daddy, does the airplane look like a giant bird? Does it flap its wings?" James laughed and crouched beside her. "Not exactly, princess. It's bigger than any bird you've ever seen, and it doesn't flap. It just runs really fast and then, whoosh, it flies into the sky." Ly gasped dramatically. "Can I see the clouds up close?" "You'll see them right outside your window," James replied, brushing her hair back gently. Tu Diep watched the two of them, her heart pulled in two directions, fear and warmth. She wanted to be brave, especially for her daughter. But the thought of sitting thousands of feet above the ground made her stomach tighten. James noticed the hesitation in her eyes and walked over, lowering his voice. "Hey," he said softly, "I'll be right next to you the whole time. I promise. It's safe. Millions of people fly every day." She gave him a faint smile. "You make it sound simple." "Because it is," he teased. "And besides, this is our first Tet visiting my parents as a full family. I want them to see the two most important people in my life." That night, as lantern light glowed gently against the bamboo walls, Tu Diep began packing. She folded her ao dai carefully, smoothing out every crease, then picked out tiny dresses for Ly. One pink, one yellow, one red with embroidered flowers. She paused often, staring at the suitcase as if it might suddenly answer her worries. "What if I get airsick?" she asked nervously. James, sitting cross-legged on the floor assembling travel documents, looked up. "Then I'll hold the bag for you," he joked. She shot him a look. He chuckled and moved closer. "You won't. I'll show you how to breathe during takeoff. And if you feel scared, just squeeze my hand." Meanwhile, Ly was stuffing her favorite stuffed rabbit, two plastic dinosaurs, and a tiny drum into the suitcase. "Ly," Tu Diep said gently, "we don't need all of that." "But what if the airplane gets bored?" Ly argued innocently. James burst out laughing. "Don't worry, sweetheart, the airplane won't get bored, but you can bring one toy." After serious consideration, Ly chose the rabbit and hugged it tightly. "You're coming to the sky with me," she whispered to it. The morning of departure arrived faster than Tu Diep expected. The airport was unlike anything she had ever seen. Wide glass walls, bright lights, rolling suitcases humming across the floor, voices echoing from every direction. She instinctively reached for Ny's hand, gripping it firmly. "Mommy, look! So many airplanes!" Ly pointed toward the runway, her eyes wide with awe. Tu Diep felt small in the middle of it all, overwhelmed by the scale of the place. James moved confidently through the crowd, guiding them to the check-in counter. "Just follow me." he said reassuringly. When the staff handed Ni her boarding pass, she stared at it as if it were a treasure map. "Is this my ticket to the sky?" she asked. "Yes," James said. "That's your official sky ticket?" She held it carefully with both hands, pride radiating from her tiny frame. Then came the moment they boarded. As the plane began taxiing down the runway, Tu Diep's breathing grew shallow. The engines roared louder and louder. She grabbed James's hand so tightly that he winced slightly but didn't pull away. "It's okay," he whispered close to her ear. "Just breathe with me, in and out." Ly, on the other hand, squealed with excitement. "We're going fast, faster than a motorbike." And then suddenly the ground tilted away and the city shrank beneath them. Tu Diep closed her eyes at first, her heart racing. But when she opened them again, all she saw outside the window was white, soft, endless clouds stretching like cotton fields under the sun. Ly pressed her face to the glass. "Mommy, we're above the clouds. We're in the sky for real." Her laughter was pure, fearless. Slowly, Tu Diep's grip loosened. The plane wasn't shaking wildly. It wasn't terrifying. It was peaceful. James looked at her gently. "See? You're doing great," she exhaled deeply. Maybe some fears only exist because we've never tried," she said softly. He smiled. "Exactly." They leaned into each other as the plane cruised steadily forward. 3 small figures suspended between earth and sky, sharing a quiet, unforgettable first. For Tu Diep, it wasn't just about flying. It was about stepping into a new chapter, trusting not only the aircraft beneath her, but the man beside her. When the plane finally landed and slowed on the runway, Ly clapped enthusiastically. "Again! Let's fly again!" James laughed. "Maybe on the way back." As they walked into the arrival hall, James's parents were already waiting. His mother's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw them. "You've come home," she said, pulling Tu Diep into a warm embrace before she could even bow politely. Tu Diep stiffened for a second, then slowly relaxed, surprised by the sincerity of the hug. James's father lifted Ly into his arms. "So this is our brave little sky traveler," he exclaimed. Ly giggled. "I touched the clouds, Grandpa." The air was filled with laughter, relief, and the unmistakable warmth of reunion. As they drove toward the countryside, peach blossoms lined the roads and red banners fluttered in the wind. Tu Diep watched the scenery pass by, her earlier fears replaced by something softer, belonging. Maybe she had been afraid not only of flying, but of not fitting into this new family. Yet here she was, welcomed with open arms. That night, under a sky lit with early fireworks and glowing lanterns, she realized something profound. Sometimes, the scariest journeys lead you exactly where you were meant to be. The first morning in James's hometown began with the distant sound of roosters and the gentle murmur of neighbors greeting one another across low garden fences. Sunlight slipped through the wooden shutters, casting soft golden lines across the floor where little Ly was already awake, sitting cross-legged and staring out the window in amazement. "Mommy," she whispered excitedly, "the trees here look different." "They're smiling," Tu Diep laughed quietly from the bed. "Trees don't smile, sweetheart." Ly turned around seriously. "They do. Look at the flowers." And when Tu Diep finally rose and walked to the window, she saw peach blossoms stretching toward the morning light, delicate and hopeful, just like her daughter's imagination. Downstairs, James's mother was already in the kitchen, preparing sticky rice and braised pork for the first days of Tet. The scent filled the entire house. Tu Diep hesitated at the doorway for a moment, unsure how to step into someone else's space. But James's mother noticed her immediately. "Come here, child," she said warmly. "You must be tired from the flight yesterday." Tu Diep bowed slightly out of habit. "I'm fine, Mother. Please let me help." The older woman smiled knowingly. "Then wash these vegetables for me." It was a simple request, but it felt like an invitation, an unspoken acceptance. Outside, James and his father were hanging red lanterns along the front gate. "Higher," his father instructed. Tet lanterns should shine bright so good fortune can see the way. James adjusted the string and glanced toward the kitchen window where Tu Diep stood beside his mother. He felt a quiet relief settle in his chest. This was what he had hoped for, a merging of worlds, not a collision. Later that morning, they walked together to the local Tet market. The road was alive with color, baskets of kumquats, stacks of square bonchung wrapped in green leaves, trays of candied ginger and coconut displayed like jewels. Ly refused to stay still, darting between stalls with her grandfather close behind. "Slow down, sky traveler," he called playfully. She turned and announced proudly to a vendor, "I flew above the clouds yesterday." The woman laughed. "Then you must be very brave." Ly puffed out her chest. "I am." Tu Diep walked beside James, absorbing everything. The laughter, the bargaining voices, the sense of tradition passed down through generations. "It's different from where we live," she said softly. James nodded. "But does it feel strange?" She paused, searching for the right word. "Not strange, just new." He squeezed her hand gently. "New can be good." As the afternoon faded, they returned home carrying flowers and sweets. Ly ran into the yard, chasing a small paper windmill that James's father had bought her. The house buzzed with preparation. Red envelopes were stacked neatly on the table. The ancestral altar was polished and decorated with fruit. Tu Diep watched James light incense, his face serious, yet peaceful. There was something grounding about seeing him here. Less guarded, more rooted. That evening, as neighbors stopped by to exchange greetings, Tu Diep found herself answering questions, smiling more easily. "Is this your first time visiting?" one auntie asked kindly. "Yes," she replied honestly, "and my first time on a plane." Gasps of surprise followed. "Oh, and you survived," another joked. Tu Diep laughed, surprising herself with how light she felt. "I did, and I might even do it again." When night finally fell, the family gathered in the courtyard. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of smoke and blossoms. Ly sat on James's lap, eyes fixed on the sky. "When will the fireworks start?" she asked impatiently. "Soon," James whispered. "Good things are worth waiting for." As midnight approached, the first burst of color exploded overhead, red and gold sparks scattering across the darkness. Ly gasped so loudly that everyone laughed. More fireworks followed, each one brighter than the last. Tu Diep stood beside James, watching the reflections dance in her daughter's eyes. Without thinking, James reached for her hand. "Thank you for trusting me," he said quietly, almost lost beneath the crackling sky. She looked at him, her expression tender. "Thank you for giving us a place in your world." The noise softened after a while, replaced by gentle conversation and the exchange of red envelopes. James's father handed Ly her first leekshi of the year. "For our brave girl," he said proudly. Ly held the envelope carefully as if it contained magic. "Is this because I flew?" she asked. "Partly," he replied with a wink. "And because you brought joy with you?" Later, when most of the neighbors had returned home and the lanterns flickered low, Tu Diep and James remained outside for a moment alone. The night felt calmer now, almost intimate. "I need to tell you something," Tu Diep began softly. He turned toward her, listening. "Before we came here, I was afraid. Not just of flying. I was afraid I wouldn't belong, that your family might see me as an outsider." She swallowed gently. "I didn't want to disappoint you." James stepped closer, his voice steady. "Look at what you've done today. You helped my mother in the kitchen. You laughed with the neighbors. You held our daughter while she watched her first fireworks here. You don't need to prove anything." He brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "Home isn't a location, Diep. It's wherever we stand together." She felt tears threaten to rise, but they weren't tears of fear this time. They were the quiet, overwhelming kind that come when something inside finally settles. "So, wherever you are," she said softly, "that's home." He nodded without hesitation. "Wherever we are." Inside, Nie was already half asleep, clutching her red envelope and her stuffed rabbit. Tu Diep watched her for a long moment before turning off the light. Just days ago, she had stood in their small bamboo house worrying about stepping onto a plane. Now she stood in a different house, surrounded by new memories, feeling something she hadn't expected: peace. The next morning would bring more visits, more laughter, more traditions. But tonight marked something deeper. It marked the moment fear turned into courage, distance turned into closeness, and a simple flight became the bridge between two families. As the final lantern flickered outside and the new year quietly settled in, Tu Diep understood a truth she would carry long after this holiday ended. Family isn't only the place you're born into. It's the people who hold your hand when you're afraid, who wait for you at arrivals with open arms, and who make room for you at their table without hesitation. And sometimes, all it takes to find that place is the courage to fly. This story follows Tu Diep and little Nie as they experience their very first flight, guided by James, who brings them back to his hometown to celebrate Tet with his family. What begins as a journey filled with fear and uncertainty slowly transforms into a meaningful step toward belonging and connection. From the overwhelming airport to the emotional moment the plane lifts off, Tu Diep confronts her anxiety while Nie embraces the adventure with pure excitement. Upon arrival, they are welcomed warmly by James's parents, easing Diep's hidden fears of not fitting in. Surrounded by traditional Tet preparations, bustling markets, and a heartfelt New Year's Eve under fireworks, the family grows closer than ever. In the end, the trip becomes more than just a visit. It becomes proof that home is not just where you are born, but where you are loved and accepted.